afternoon and welcome to the African Utility Week studio. My name is Amy Ryan and today I have with me Brian Williams, who is the Industry Advisory Director for Utilities at SAP. Welcome, Brian.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Amy.
So tell me, how have you been enjoying the African Utility Week event so far?
It's a phenomenal event. Really surprised by the quality of the exhibitors and the spectrum of solutions that are being covered. So well done.
You took part in a panel discussion, or was it a presentation that you gave yesterday? Right. Can you raise some of the main discussion points that you tried to get across to the attendees?
Right. Yeah, so the really big takeaway from my session to the audience was the convergence of information technology, operations technology, and the Internet of Things. Okay. In our case, we were specifically addressing the role of information technology in the context of technical and non-technical losses for transmission and distribution grids. And our point of view is that the amount of data that is required to correctly identify what investments should be made is an opportunity that has the potential to impact billions of dollars of investment, and at the same time to help utilities in Africa to optimize their investments and do the risk investment trade-off.
Okay. My second question is around the deployment of smart grid technologies and Internet of Things technologies. What are some of the concerns that have been raised by some of your clients, utility clients in Africa, around the deployment of those?
In the transmission space, it's a pretty much closed and shut case. Okay. I don't think there's any argument against using SCADA and grid monitoring technologies in the high voltage world. Yeah. It's a little bit more of a mixed bag when it comes to medium and low voltage. Yeah. I think the attributes of distributing energy in South Africa in particular, but I imagine this is true across the continent, is such that pilfering and outright theft of distribution assets is a legitimate concern for many of our utility customers. And so one has to be a lot more pragmatic. Yeah. And the role of the Internet of Things, as it were, I see would be more around the mass distribution, if you will, the mass application of very cheap sensors. Okay. To detect perhaps the pilfering or the otherwise interference of these assets. So, for example, picking up vibration signatures and the like when folks are messing with the assets. Yeah. So that's one application of the Internet of Things I see in the distribution network. If one goes a step further, and this came from the floor as well, and I was glad to receive the question, what does this look like from a consumer's perspective? And I think, one thing about Africa that we can all agree with is the widespread adoption of wireless technologies, mobile phones, is unprecedented. It's remarkably rapid. And I see there the potential for the behind the meter, if you will, or the direct to the consumer interaction with customers and between customers and utilities being a secondary way of monitoring the grid itself. So for example, if your customer knew how to quickly complain or raise the alert that there is a drop in service, then that would enable the utility to react that much faster.
Okay. Can you raise maybe some of the points around devising maybe innovative strategies around how to sustainably reduce technical losses?
So, going on from that pragmatic streak, on the one hand, in the simple case where the pilferage or the energy theft is evident, then one of the other panelists on the conversation yesterday brought up alternative transformers and switchgear that is not cooled with oil and is not using copper in its coils. So, in the obvious case, that is the solution to improve the efficiency of the distribution grid. But I think what is less obvious and more important, and this is in response to a question from one of the gentlemen from the South African utility, is the very difficult challenge of doing the investment risk trade-off. So for example, in any given metro area in South Africa, there are probably many hundreds of thousands, at least many tens of thousands of transformers that are distributed through the network. And the question is, in your annual budgeting program to renew your fleet, first of all, which of those transformers, for example, should you be replacing? And alternatively, what would happen if you didn't replace them? Yeah. So that risk investment trade-off, looking into the future 3, 4, 5 years, is a difficult challenge that every single one of my customers, irrespective of continent or country, faces. And that's where we see the role of technology, and especially the type of technologies we deploy with the convergence of information technology and operating technology being incredibly important. In short, what we see is our utilities being able to analyze asset health indicators in near real time and make, again, in near real time, these trade-offs between what the investment should be and what, just as importantly, the risks to the network will be if they don't make the investment.
Okay. Are there any maybe strategies around losses, non-technical and technical losses, that are maybe have been successful overseas that maybe can be deployed here in Africa and would work for African utilities as well?
Well, in the conventional sense, absolutely. So using big data and high-speed analytics, for example, in Brazil, we have customers that are able to geospatially monitor and using historical trend consumption of not just a customer but a pocket of customers to infer if that customer is now behaving in a way that's a little bit odd given their previous consumption patterns. And so that's one way to detect especially non-technical losses across the consumer base. On the technical losses side though, that's where we look at what I mentioned earlier, the monitoring of the grid itself. And I think the big picture there for us is the balancing of the network. If in a perfect world we would be living on a copper flat plate and distribution would be perfect, and of course that's not possible. So every utility has to balance this investment versus revenue potential of laying copper or aluminum into the ground, such that you're reaching the most number of customers with just the right amount of investment. And in that case, the balance of technical losses again becomes this analytical trade-off between how much to invest in my network versus how much revenue I can expect to earn back.
Okay. And then this risk analysis or trade-offs that you mentioned.
Right.
Is there like kind of maybe plug-and-play solutions or platforms that are available for utilities to be able to do this? Or is it a more, not one directional approach? Is it many different?
Good question, and it's a difficult one to answer. So I work in many different countries, and I'll tell you that it's really only the UK that I can say with confidence that a standard exists that is provided by the regulator for all the electrical utilities, especially the distribution utilities, to use. So in their case, there is a plug-and-play solution for following a prescriptive approach to calculating asset health indicators to solve this difficult problem. Having said that, everywhere else in the world, you're pretty much on your own. Okay. And so what you'll find is this tension between the regulator and the utility trying to make this justification for their capital budget on an annual basis. And you know how it goes in South Africa, right? So the utility will ask for X billions of rand and the regulator will come back with a lower number, almost always. And so I think the role of analytics is really important for the utility to grasp and take advantage of. So, as I mentioned earlier, if the utility really understands and has a handle on the asset health indicators, then they can say to the regulator, look, this is the legitimate reason for my capital requirements for the following year. And if you don't grant me these investments, this is the elevated risk that this network is going to experience in the coming years. And I think that's where we're at now with every utility. And so, no two countries will be exactly the same, but we have learned lessons around the world, and I think we can apply those in the African context as well.
And then finally, Brian, what are your top 3 predictions for the African power sector over the next 1 or 2 years?
So, this is a little bit divergent from my presentation yesterday around IT, OT, and IoT. And so, when I stand back and look at what I see globally and how those trends apply in Africa, I think some are absolutely upon us, and I'm just waiting to see what's going to happen. And I'd say the number one is electromobility.
Okay.
In every model that I've looked at, and the projection of the uptake of electromobility into countries has surpassed the most ambitious projections.
Yes.
And I can't wait to see African entrepreneurs climb on the bandwagon and use electromobility in ways that we couldn't anticipate so far. Imagine mass transit networks of taxis that are electromobile. On the one hand, it's an immediate bump and revenue angle for many of the metro utilities. And I know, for example, the city of Cape Town has a flat revenue line. And here you have an opportunity to sell energy to a hungry market.
Yeah.
So that's the one part. The other part of it is, I think, electromobility has the interesting characteristic that you'll have a vehicle driving around your network that is itself a mini power station of sorts.
Yeah.
It has its electrical capacity in its battery, and I think that has some interesting implications, especially in the African context, where you could move energy, say, from an inner city area, a built-up area, out to a rural area. So that's the one part. The second big takeaway I would warn all utilities, especially in Africa, to pay attention to is the role of renewables.
Yeah.
So, what people don't always grasp with renewables, as much as they are very exciting and they're the way of the future, they have the interesting characteristic of zero marginal cost. So the extra watt of energy from the sun costs you no more than you already have invested. And so what we're seeing in Europe, for example, is the zero marginal cost driving negative pricing. So the big picture here is that I see a world, and it's not a very far distant world, where the cost of energy itself could effectively be free. Now, I'm not saying that'll happen, but imagine that the cost pressure on electricity is going to continue to decline. So if you're a utility and you depend on energy revenues, it's time to rethink your business model.
Yeah.
And so, what I would propose there is to think what people are doing with the electricity. Obviously electromobility is one target, but typically people buy comfort. So utilities need to reconsider what it is that the consumer is in fact wanting to buy. And that leads me to the third point, and that is customer intimacy. The point there is that if you have that customer intimacy, you can tailor make your service proposition to each individual customer. And the big point there is that the cost of big data and data analytics has come down to the point where it shouldn't matter what your customer's economic value is to society in general. So I think what I'd like to see coming is no matter if you're a low-income person or a high-income person, the role of analytics is the same.
Yeah.
What the utility should be capable of doing is target a set of services to every customer. And I think African consumers should expect nothing less.
That's actually a point that one of the previous speakers as well brought up is actually the value of data and using data to segment your utility base and offer targeted offerings and services.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and I think if you take that to its logical conclusion, you're segmenting to a customer of one.
Yeah.
And we're there. You know, we can do that in other economies, and I see that with the low cost of data and analytics, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to expect the same capability for Africa.
Okay. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the African Utility Week studio. This is Amy Ryan. Thank you for watching.